A very warm welcome to all the esteemed experts on the virtual platform and all the audience who have joined us through Facebook and YouTube. I am Professor Renu Malavia, Secretary IBAFA and Professor at the Department of Education, Lady Urban College, University of Delhi. Let us start this webinar with our traditional auspicious lamp lighting ceremony as a tribute to divinity, the lamp of knowledge and wisdom.
गजाननं भूतगणादिसेवितं कवित्तजम्बो बलसारभक्षितम् उमासुतं शोकविनाशकारणम् नमामि विघ्नेश्वर
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to everyone. It is indeed my proud privilege to request Ms. Asha Chandra, our President of IBAFA, All India Women's Education Fund Association, for the welcome address and to acquaint us to IBAFA. Before I hand over the virtual mic to Asha Chandra, I take this opportunity to say a few words about her. An advertising professional, Asha Chandra's expertise spans multimedia platforms. Having worked with the world's leading advertising agencies, J. Walter Thompson and Ogilvy and Meather, and as a short filmmaker and writer, she brings a target oriented, all encompassing approach to the social sector. The president of the 92-year-old All India Women's Education Fund Association, IBAFA, MS Chandra has been the governing body chairperson of Lady Urban College. Lady Urban College was founded by IBAFA in 1932. MS Asha Chandra.
Thank you, Professor Renu Malavia. Good day and warm greetings to our distinguished panelists and all our participants who are joining in from India and from all over the world. The All India Women's Education Fund Association, IBAFA, is privileged to host this edifying and timely series of 5 webinars on special learning disabilities. IBAFA, established in 1929, is soon entering its 93rd year of service for women, children, and communities. An NGO, IBAFA is in special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, ECOSOC, and has observer status with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Since 2003, for the last 19 years, IBAFA has held the prestigious Nina Sibyl Award annually. Presented to organizations working with disabilities, the award carries a cash amount of rupees 8 lakhs, a citation, and a trophy. After 2 years of being held online, the ceremony, if all goes well, will again be held on 2nd August at India Habitat Center. And we are all very hopeful physically. As the world emerges from a once in a lifetime 2 year hiatus brought on by the coronavirus, this is an opportune time to hold the series Specific Learning Disabilities. During this time of lockdowns and isolations, people, especially children, were neither considered, recognized, treated, nor ameliorated. In the absence of professional or medical advice and guidance, the children and their parents and guardians silently suffered in the confines of their homes. The SLD series on dyslexia and learning disorders follows the highly successful COVID 19 webinar series, Sustainable Solutions for Persons with Disabilities, where action packed dialogues were held on education and research, rehabilitation, visual impairment, and mental health. With IBAFA's 18 Nina Sibbal Award winners, the series was held to discuss, deliberate, and present best practices to build the resilience of people to face such crisis situations. Through this series, SLD, the organization seeks to disseminate the knowledge of our eminent expert panelists among students, professionals, parents, and concerned citizens to understand the reason behind specific learning disabilities, to acknowledge the disorder, to discover the impediments to learning, to beneficially diagnose SLD, to share experiences and best practices towards building a healthy integration of children into mainstream education and life. I'm privileged to invite our eminent speakers for the first webinar, Dr. Jayanti Natarajan, Professor Anupam Ahuja, Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha Chandra. One feels so proud to be associated with All India Women's Education Fund, uh, IBAFA, and its amazing legacy and superb presence. The national webinar series on specific learning disabilities, dyslexia, being organized by IWEFA, All India Women's Education Fund Association, has the most eminent experts from the field, pan India and abroad. According to the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016, specific learning disability, which is often spoken as synonymous to dyslexia by the general public, is actually an umbrella term for the number of neurodevelopmental diversities or disabilities, including dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and developmental aphasia. The children with specific learning disabilities have average or above average intelligence, yet majority of them tend not to do well in the school system and also often at higher education levels. That is, if they reach the higher education level. There is strong evidence that these children, under the umbrella term of specific learning disabilities, are unable to perform well in the education system because they are often not understood or are misunderstood. In these five webinar series being organized by IWAFA, the eminent panelists would take us with their discussion, reflection, practical experiences, and research based evidence, and thus enable us to gain insight into the brain structure and functional variations, categories of specific learning disabilities, and their challenges, strategies for learning, teaching processes to concerns, issues, contemporary contextualization of assessment processes to what it is like to be an SLD, a parent of an SLD, a teacher on a school's principal of an SLD. Let us commence with the first webinar in the series, Gift of Dyslexia, an Effective Brain with a Difference. We have amazing panelists with remarkable experiences on this panel. May I take the opportunity to introduce Professor Jayanti Narayan, although she needs no introduction. Dr. Jayanti Narayan is a special educator, currently a visiting professor of inclusive education, Faculty of Health, Education and Society at the University of Northampton, UK. She has retired as the Deputy Director from the National Institute for the Empowerment of Persons with Intellectual Disabilities, Government of India. She completed her post graduation from the State University of New York, USA, specializing in education, learning disabilities, and mental retardation. She holds another MA and a PhD in education. She received the Fulbright Senior Research Fellowship for Postdoctoral Research Program at Boston College, USA. She was awarded honorary doctoral also by the University of Northampton, UK. Dr. Narayan has been a consultant in special and inclusive education in countries including Indonesia, Malaysia, Maldives, China, Bhutan, Cambodia, and she has been associated with projects with UNICEF, UNDP, WHO, and other international agencies. Her numerous manuals and research publications at national and international levels and chapters in book are much the talk of the town. A very warm welcome to Professor Jayanti Narayan.
Thank you so
We
much
also,
for having me. Thank you.
it's our pleasure, ma'am. We also have with us Professor Anupam Ahuja. Professor Anupam Ahuja is a professor in the Department of Education of Group with Special Needs and head of the International Relations Division at NCERT. She has more than 30 years of national and international experiences in the field of education with the focus of developing inclusive practices. Professor Ahuja has worked in more than 20 countries on numerous assignments on training, initiating, guiding, and evaluating inclusive programs in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe. She's a member of the advisory committee to the UNESCO. She reviewed the Education for All EFA plan for 17 Asian and Pacific countries with a focus on the linkage between inclusion and the EFA Education for All. She's currently a member of the working group constituted by the Ministry of Education for developing e-content for children with special needs and inclusive education, and I'm sure she'll tell us more about this. She has contributed to many national and international research-based publications on education and school improvement for children with special needs. Also, the founder and co-editor for Enabling Education Network Asia. Welcome, Professor Anupam Ahuja. Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh is a cognitive neuroscientist and currently a senior project officer at UNESCO MGIEP New Delhi. She established the first cognitive and neuroimaging laboratory in India at the National Brain Research Center, NBRC, in India. Her research focuses on language, literacy, and music. Using behavioral and functional imaging experiments, her research aims to understand neurodiversity, especially among children with autism and dyslexia. Her work in dyslexia led to the development of DALI, Dyslexia Assessment for Language of India, the first assessment which contains standardized tool to screen assess dyslexia in multiple Indian languages. She leads the development of a new framework for social emotional learning at MGIEP entitled EMC2. This framework builds competencies in empathy, mindfulness, compassion, and critical inquiry through a new curriculum for global citizen. A very a warm welcome, Dr.
Thank you.
Nandini Singh.
Thank you.
I'm awed by with all your expertise and experience and innovations. There's so many questions that are coming to me. I'll try and address my questions to one of you at a time. However, please do add on to the discussion where there is more to enlighten us from any of you. My first question to Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh. Your evidence-based approaches from the laboratory has led to rethinking learning. How does the brain learn to read? What are the circuit variations in a brain we call dyslexia? Please enlighten us on this.
Thank you so much, Renuji. I'm taking the privilege and encroaching on your hospitality to call you Renuji and not Professor Malvia. And I have a small request. Please call me Nandini. It will just make the conversation so much more easier to approach. I am
Sure.
also honored to be amongst specialists and experts whom I have always looked up to. So uh, please accept the fact that how honored I feel to be with Jayanti ma'am and Anupam ma'am. So, returning to the question that you started with, and something that you referred to in passing as you began the conversation, uh, as a neuroscientist, we are gradually moving towards a new terminology where we are choosing to refer to children with specific learning disabilities not as SLD kids, but as people who are part of the neurodiverse spectrum. Neurodiversity is a way of life now, okay? And we all have traits within us, just that they are no longer, not yet labeled as traits that might be distinct for us. But the first point, therefore, that we have learned after we have been able to peer into the brain, thanks to the advance of technology, is that every brain is different. So, my first sort of message for a teacher who's in the classroom is when you have 30 children in your class, you don't have 30 copies of one brain, but you have 30 distinct brains in your classroom. Okay? And therefore, they will all learn differently. So, one of the things that we have learned as we have studied learning and pedagogy and brain development is that our systems have to be such that they are multimodal, multisensory, and cater to the needs of all children. Okay? And therefore, a one size fits all approach cannot work in the classroom anymore for everybody. I think that's something that is very firmly established, and I don't think there is any scope for debate there. A second factor which we have taken for granted is that reading comes very naturally to people. I'm afraid that's not the case. Language is something the brain is wired for. Okay? So there is a specific region in the brain that is built, created, available for language. And every child, and I want to emphasize, every child who is growing up in a social setting will acquire language. He or she will acquire the language that he or she is hearing around them. But a social connect is critical for language acquisition. On the other hand, the brain has no region specifically allocated to read. Okay. So a child has to be taught how to read. So a catch phrase that we often talk about for teachers is language is caught, but reading is taught. Okay. And it's important for teachers to realize that there are multiple aspects of reading that therefore need to be made explicit for a child. Okay. The fact that words consist of sounds, these sounds need to be linked to symbols. Okay? When the sounds and symbols link together in a particular sequence, they form a word. And that word when it's activated in the language area, is what leads to reading. Okay? So, four areas of the brain which were meant for other functions now get allocated to learn to read and form a new circuit. So you need to be able to visualize, which happens in the visual cortex, sitting at the back of your head here. The auditory cortex, which is meant for hearing sounds, which is sitting here. Okay. Then there is the language area, which is Broca's area, which is sitting here. Okay. So all these connect together to form a reading circuit. And I'm being very simplistic about it right now. A lot of my neuroscientist colleagues will be horrified. But I think it's important to realize that a new circuit gets formed. And that circuit gets formed because of, and I've begun to call it now a superpower, is the ability of the brain to change. We call it neuroplasticity. So, brain tissue that was meant for seeing things now starts getting specialized for the symbols of the system that you are teaching them to. Similarly, brain tissue that gets allocated for hearing now gets allocated for or specialized for hearing the sounds in words. Okay. Most children, most human beings don't realize that words comprise of sounds. We just think of them as words, but it's important to break them down into sounds. Okay. And so it's this explicit teaching of sound, symbol, sequence, and meaning that leads to a reading circuit. And we expect a child to pick it up in a couple of weeks. I think we are being quite unfair. And that's where it's time that we begin to spend enough time focusing on how to build reading circuits. A second point that I would like to emphasize before I pass the floor back to you is the purpose of reading is to build on spoken language or oral language. Okay? So it is necessary, it is really necessary that a child who learns to read in a particular language is already aware of the language. So, what do I mean by aware? The child should understand the language and have some vocabulary. Okay. Otherwise, when you try and teach these aspects in the classroom, the poor child has no other option but to memorize whatever you are teaching them. And that will never lead to reading. The way the reading circuit works, and we call it decoding to be specific, is where you teach the child to break up words into sounds, map those sounds to symbols, and then assemble them together. And then, of course, over a period of time, as the child gets better at it, is when reading becomes automatic and the child can begin to focus on the content of what is being laid out in that passage. And that's really a place where dyslexia begins to come in. Okay. Children who, despite intelligence and instruction, have a challenge still trying to access meaning in the entire sentence or the paragraph, and therefore begin to be challenged in the classroom, is when dyslexia begins to occur. So their energy is completely taken up by just trying to assemble those sounds together. That automatization of the reading process has not yet happened. And that, I'm afraid, happens because of practice. So the way we have started to look at dyslexia now is there are some kids who require a little more time to automatize this process. And therefore, we need to give them more time. We need to practice the different rules associated a little longer with them. And a lot of kids will be able to cope with it. Okay? I think that's something we need to recognize and realize. And finally, the fact that dyslexia cannot be cured. You can accommodate for dyslexia and you can accommodate beautifully. And it's important to be able to find strengths for the child to be able to build on so that his or her motivation or confidence is not impacted. And finally, last words, I promise, Renuji, the fact that motivation and social emotional states of the child play a very important role in all learning. Okay, so that's something we always want to ensure, not just in children with dyslexia but with all kids. So probably I've said too many things, but uh, the challenge is that learning to read does require a number of things. So we do need to keep all of these in mind. I hope this has been able to respond to some extent to your question on what have we learned new about reading in the context of education. I'll stop there.
Now I'm able to understand better that why it is important, what different parts of the brain store it, and you explained it so well at a layman's language levels. And now I'm sure I understand this so much better and take it further. uh, Thank you, Professor Ahuja. Coming from what Nandini has said, uh, NEP 2020 is, in taking it forward here, is a people's policy, and it talks about how learning teaching process need to become learner centered. So all those 30 different people, so that's what I think NEP 2020 is also talking about, looks like. Is it supporting children with brain diversities, such as the child with specific learning disabilities? What is a key message you would want to highlight from it for teachers and teacher educators?
Um, yes, what is the key message? Well, firstly, thank you, Nandini, for starting the ball rolling and helping us understand in such a lucid manner the whole concept of children with specific learning disabilities. Now, as regards the policy, as you said, Renu, it surely and positively focuses on diversity. And when it does that, it includes children with specific learning disabilities. And as you said in your introduction, which is an umbrella term, including those with dyslexia. Now, that's a very, very important outcome for us to acknowledge. Because all these years, we have been focusing to a very large extent on getting children into schools. For a very, very long time after we gained independence, we were wanting all children to be part of our school systems. But we also realized during that process that many children just left our school systems as well. And this happened when we looked at our statistics, when we saw our children at the higher education level, how many had joined and how many were there when they finished their schooling. And amongst this group, we also came to know were children with specific learning disabilities. These children uh, were actually a big enigma. And why they were an enigma, Nandini has reflected on that and shared her thoughts on it. Now, the disability, the lack of learning was not so evident. When it's a child with, say, visual difficulties, you can see that the child is, different. When there is some physical disability in the limbs, you can see. But when it's a child with specific learning disabilities, as you yourself said in your introduction, they are misunderstood. They are not really, they're often taken as lazy, being difficult children, or not being attentive, and they need to be coaxed and punished sometimes also in order to be part of the classroom. Now, the policy very clearly says that their needs have to be understood, and learning material and classroom pedagogy has to be tuned according to their requirements. Now, this is something that I say this policy really has flagged for us. And for these children, it's a big, big step forward. In fact, a leap forward. Now, it's for us, all of us, to take this forward. The policy can give it to us, but it can't make it happen. So making it happen is something that webinars like the ones you have organized, and making this awareness for people will really help. One, that it is there for us to now consider, and two, that all material that we make or all innovations that we talk about should accommodate the diversity in the classroom, including those with children with specific learning disabilities. Now, diversity is here to stay. That's a key message that the NEP tells us. It says that teachers, parents, you and I have to work to see that this diversity is not frowned upon. A teacher doesn't say, oh, if he doesn't come today, I'm going to have a nice day. No, a teacher has to pull up her socks, and with our support. I mean, it's not that we are expecting the teacher to become a magician and have a magic wand in her. We all need to pitch in to help a teacher address diversity and welcome it and celebrate it. I mean, I think these are very important words and messages that the NEP talks about. In fact, throughout, on every page, if you really sit and reflect, there is a message for inclusion that you see. So an inclusion with a sense of purpose, and we talk about inclusion as part of improving quality of education. You are not talking of just getting children in, as I said in the beginning, and seeing that our classrooms are full and that schools are now available within 3 kilometers, so we can get them in. No, we need to retain them and provide them good quality education according to their potentials. Just like what Nandini just explained. If a child needs more time to start the process of reading, give that time to the child. I mean, don't just rush through and make it, go as it has to be done within that period of time. These are messages that NEP is loudly talking about and wants teachers to internalize them and use them in their own way. There is no one set way that we are also talking about. Because of our diversity in our country and the potentials of teachers, their training, and the teacher educators who train them, their diversity as well. This is something also the policy says, that a teacher should be given the freedom to exercise her own, capacities and her own experiences, and then meet the needs of these children. But clearly, we need to help the teacher work with these children and consider them as part of the classroom, helping them actualize the right to education. That's a clear message. Their presence in the class is not optional, is not a favor, is not something that a teacher is doing as a, oh, poor you. No. This child has a place in the class, and a teacher needs to learn. A parent needs to help a teacher learn to meet the needs of this child. And that's a very, very big movement forward for us who are keenly wanting to promote inclusive education in the country.
That's I picked up so many points here, but let Nandini would want to add something. Please, Nandini.
I just wanted to chip in and add in one more point, which for me personally has been very, very attractive in the context of dyslexia in the NEP, and that is the focus on mother tongue learning. Okay, which goes back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, that children learn to read much better if they have oral language. And we now know that most children come to school with the mother tongue in place, or whatever might be the language in the home. It's changed right now. It's no longer just one, but at least there is. We know that children come to school not necessarily with English, but with the mother tongue, and we might therefore start the instruction of reading in the language which the child already speaks. I think that focus of the NEP could potentially become very valuable for children who might be at risk for dyslexia.
Great. So what I take back from Anupam's Ahuja's answers is that university is here. I mean, sorry, diversity is here to stay, and we need to celebrate it. And it's the teachers, the society, which needs to understand the child and change rather than getting the child to change for us. And of course, spaces for all. Very wonderful. May I take, thank you so much. May I take this to Professor Jayanti Narayan? Um, with your immense experiences, what do you think is the impact of the invisible nature of this condition called SLD on the child, the family, and the school?
Thank you, Renuji. Thank you for this opportunity to be with this August panel with great speakers. So much to learn. Thank you so much for including me in this. And I also congratulate All India Women's Education Fund Association for continuing to empower women. 92 years, not a small period. And Asha ji, Adarsh ji, Sharla ji, congratulations for having this wonderful platform that I'm realizing every word that Anupam ji and Nandini ji had been talking made a lot of sense. And like Renu ji rightly said, who herself is been teaching SLD for so many years, having got so many PhDs. But when every person speaks, we learn more from the way they speak, and we keep taking notes on that. And fantastic beginning both of them have made. And as Nandini ji has rightly said, reading is uh, taught while language is caught. That is why now we think, aha, that is why our illiterate ancestors could speak, but they could not read because no one taught them to read, isn't it? The mechanism also had to be in place by putting together the existing anatomical structure to wire together to come to the status called reading. So I leave it there, and Anupam ji has beautifully added on to say how government is now taking effort to give them a visibility, and then it is not that we are doing a favor. I underscore that sentence. We are not, as teachers, doing a favor to these children, but it is their right to be educated. We better do it right. That is what Anupamji's bottom line was, and let us try our best to see that we do that. Now, the invisible nature of the condition that we are talking about. So, first thing, all of you will agree that these children are not understood and worse, misunderstood many a time as lazy. These children are mischievous. These children पढ़ना नहीं आता, ये तो बहुत शरारती है. The common terminology used, people do not understand them, and or they misunderstand them worse because of the invisible nature of the condition. Parents tend to compared to the siblings to say, look, he's younger to you, but he's doing so very well. There are some studies that show the incidence of firstborn with SLD is more than the later born one. There are a few studies here and there. I don't know how authentic they are, but the parents tend to say your younger brother is better than you, are useless, you're this, you're that. And the school, these children never become the favorite of the teachers because generally teachers look for those bright ones. But there are some good teachers who worry about them, and then they tend to call the parents and tell them maybe he needs a tuition, maybe he needs eyes need to be checked, this, that, all other things. But these are children who have intact sensory motor abilities and intellectual abilities in them. Just like Nandini ji very simply put a complex concept of the wiring is not appropriate, therefore the neurodiversity in them which is invisible. So some teachers are helpful too, but generally what happens in the classroom, to him the child is an intelligent child, he is understanding the happenings in the classroom, he believes I am doing my best, I am not doing anything wrong, why is it I am not like others? So he himself develops the secondary psychological problems within him, and he starts to believe I am useless, or I am not like others, I am not able to. Low self-esteem builds in the child. Or the flip side, I have seen young boys, especially closer to their adolescence, they become revolts. कुछ भी करूं तो appreciation नहीं मिलता, क्यों करूं? You know, so that they become the delinquent tendencies happen in them because they have tried their best and they are unable to really impress others, and they don't know why I am not able to do it. The invisibility is not only affecting his self, but also the reaction he is getting from others makes it more complex for himself. I give this example in most of my workshop. Many of you would have heard this, but let me say this once again. There are two children in a classroom, and then there is one child, let us say, who has got a 95 marks, and with a typically growing child, 95 marks. And here is our youngster who has got a youngster with specific learning disability who has got a 25 aggregate. So the teacher tells both of them, the 95 guy, she tells, next time you must get a centum, work hard. Every teacher does that, right? And to this child, oh, you still have your marks in red, next time it should be in blue. You should pass, you work hard and you are going to pass, and all that. So happens, he works hard, works hard, works hard. You know how much these children put in efforts not knowing what's wrong with me. Unfortunately, that's what it is. But well, he manages a 41. The other kid gets a 98. So the teacher says, oh, 98, fantastic. Where did you lose the 2 marks? Come on, next time it should be a centum. And then this boy has got a gain of 15 to 16 marks. To get at 40 or 41, there is a 15 to 60 marks gain for which he worked hard. Teacher says, oh, good, you're passed now. This is not enough. You have to work hard. You have to get better marks. And the comment goes on, but the other child's notebook is picked up and shown to the whole class. He says, clap for him, da 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 da, all that happens. Yes or no? So the 15, 16 mark gain is not as much recognized as the 2 to 3 marks gain, and that child would anyway do well. He is already in his 90s. The teacher doesn't realize, poor thing, the teacher doesn't realize that this upsets the child or brings his self-esteem lower. I have done so well. I'm not recognized as much as the other child. He doesn't understand why. All this happen in the primary classes, friends. So what happens? They're feeling that I'm no good continues, and it gets reinforced to become a belief. Then the belief makes him think teacher doesn't like me, teacher is mean, teacher is partial, da 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 da, all those thoughts. So his actions. So the feeling reinforced to become belief. Belief leads to action, incomplete work, sloppy work. I won't do it. I've not done my homework. Negativities. See, the secondary psychological problem are created because we have not understood him. His primary issue remaining what it is, as Nandini ji and Anupam ji have explained, not understanding the child. Where will he go? Go home, parents shout at him, useless, you are this, you are that. Come to school, this is the situation. Poor child, no friends, no peer group. He is not able to make friends because of his low self-esteem. I have had a young boy with specific learning disability coming to me. The parents told that he steals money from the pockets. They found out after a long time. And the story goes that he goes to canteen and buys eatables to the other children, and because of that, he is important. So he wants to feel important. We children know, after all, we go with him and he will get us a toffee. We go with him, he'll get us this. So he started to feel, I am approved in the peer group. I am important. To do that, to continue to do that, the kid started to pick money from his papa's pocket. So the whole thing got resolved later with a lot of working with him. I'm trying to tell you how all it can manifest in the child. We may end up having kids like this. So the invisibility of the condition makes it more complex for the child, for the parent, for the teacher, and we need to be really aware of it and pass it on to the family and teachers in such a manner that the secondary psychological issues do not develop in our children who already are having a primary issue with which is invisible. So make it visible, make people understand. Simple language like what Nandini ji used is going to be of great help in understanding. It needs to be reaching far and wide. I stop here for now. Yeah, thank you. You're mute. You're mute, Renuji.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Jayanti ji. This whole thing about how invisibility needs to be made visible, and the other thing, and talking about how we create so many behavior issues for our children, mental health issues, just because we, the so called experts, are not putting invisible things into concrete, visible aspects. Um, Let us, may I go from here? I am taken to the next question and thoughts is to Nandini ji, that your work on complexity of sound, orthographic processing, alpha syllabary, and other indicates that brain tissues get allocated differently in different brains. So that's what you have already touched upon. Could you please elaborate a little more on that? That how does this happen, and why that those 30 children with different diversities, different brains in the classroom, and what's happening there? What are the dynamics happening there?
Serenity, you pose difficult questions for me, but let me try and see how well I can get them across. So, orthography is a technical term which is essentially to try and describe the rules that map sounds to symbols. Okay? If I was to put it simply, okay? And it's clearly something that's important when we do spelling. Okay? But as and I'm surrounded by teachers who, I mean, who've been teachers much longer than I have been around, and uh, we all know that the rules of sounds and symbols vary across languages. Okay? So,
your,
simple
your
example
voice.
that we is my voice breaking?
It's clear.
Okay. So, to put it simply, in English, you have COUGH as cough, but BOUGH as bow. Okay. And a child who has learned the rules of reading will most likely say BOUGH as buff. Okay? So the child has learned the rules of sound and letter mapping. He or she is not wrong at all. It's just that in English, we have these idiosyncrasies in terms of mapping. Okay? And therefore, the child just needs to be taught that, it's so the basic mapping of sound to letter is actually in place, but you have these variations. In BUT, but it's the U sound, the U symbol is so it's but. When it's put, the U symbol is O. Okay? So you have to remember these. Okay. And as a consequence, what neuroimaging data has shown is so before I get into that, one thing that we now know across the world, across all writing systems of the world, we know that there are two circuits to reading. Okay? And we all use common circuits across all of them. One is called the direct route, okay, where words that we see frequently, very often, but, cut, where, who, all of these you don't need to read. They become like objects. You see them and you know what the word is. Okay? That again comes with practice and exposure. But every time you see a new word, so if, for instance, if you all of you were reading the word dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's a region of the brain which you might not have encountered earlier. What you will do is most likely pause, break up that word into syllables, and then read it. Okay, that's the assembled route to reading. Okay, that's what children start out by doing if we teach them the rules of mapping letters to sound. By doing this persistently, they start taking some of the words which were part of the assembled route to now the direct route because they're getting better at it. Okay. Now, this is true if one looks at language systems now, and if you look at English and Hindi. In English, there are many words that are very difficult to be read along the assembled word route. You often have to have all these exceptions to remember. Okay? So colonel can be read as colonel or colonel. Okay? And therefore, increasingly, people and children who become good at reading English start using one route to learn to read. Okay? And that route is the short or the direct route to reading. But in languages like Hindi, which are quite transparent, the symbols are read pretty much the same way in every context. The challenges really come sometimes when you have uh, a matra and you don't know whether it's a n or a m that's being substituted there. So the contexts there are very limited. And in contrast to English, Hindi actually is a much more transparent orthography. The other advantage with Hindi is the the aksharas are symbols themselves. So children very quickly find a word, know that if they learn the symbols, they can just put them together and start learning how to read. So perter is put, lutter is lut, cutter is cut. Okay. In English, on the other hand, you want that child to learn phonemic awareness. K, ma. The poor child doesn't know what this k, ma is. Okay, you have to bring it alive for that child. Okay, so when you say cat and you say ka atter, ka is actually the full symbol that you're using. Now these little idiosyncrasies that exist in the structure of writing systems, we now know play out differently in the brain. Okay? So different tissues might get allocated differently. That's the level of understanding that we have in terms of learning to read. But what we do know is a proficient reader in any language, okay, is going to use both routes to read. Not only that, we also know that because reading is so important in our lives, that a little bit of brain tissue sitting along this area gets allocated for words only. Okay, we call it the visual word form area. And if you go and look this up online, they call it the brain's letterbox. Okay? So that area becomes so important for reading because we do so much of reading. I think all of you must spend at least 4 or 5 hours in your day reading without even realizing it, if not more. Okay? So when you're doing that activity so often, the brain realizes that, buddy, I need to do specialize something for this, and so it allocates it. What happens in dyslexia is that allocation does not happen. So the child is not yet able to uh, allocate this tissue specifically and has to always do that difficult long route to learn to read. All proficient readers will show specific activity, very high activity in the visual word form area when you get them to learn, when you get them to read in the scanner. Children, on the other hand, and especially a dyslexic child, will actually use many more regions of the brain when he or she is learning to read and therefore gets exhausted. Remember, when the brain is working, it requires glucose, and that glucose is distributed across different parts of the brain. So when Jayanti ji mentioned that a child who's getting stressed or is anxious in the classroom, think of that child now whose brain is really taking up energy dealing with tension and anxiety. That child has very little energy available to read. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is to say, buddies, stop worrying, stop stressing. Let's begin to use the energy that you have for the process at hand. And that's really one place where, social emotional learning, some level of good breathing exercises, ways to calm the brain actually help much more before a child actually starts to go to read. So often when teachers come into a classroom, and we're starting to say this even more after the pandemic, is we don't want to immediately start studying in the classroom. Let's start forming a relationship in the classroom first. Let's maybe talk about how we are feeling today. Somebody has something nice to share. Spend those 5 minutes connecting in the classroom. Form that relationship. Then let's start learning letter sound mapping and all of that. So your brain is ready to receive instruction when that begins to happen. Okay? That this 3 pound mass is dealing with everything around you. Okay, not just what the teacher is saying, but there's one child talking over there, there's somebody shifting over there, there's some other noise coming from all of that. The brain is doing all of that. So we want to first try and figure a way for the child to come into the classroom, bring attention, and then start exposing them to these rules of orthography. And a second thing which I want to leave aside for teachers to think about is you will be surprised to know we are the only country in the world that exposes children to two writing systems at age 5.
Oh.
English and Hindi, or Bengali and Hindi, or Bengali and English. We do not have a system to this, and this is something we need to start addressing seriously as a people. We have to really bring in parents to say, and this obsession with English has to stop. Child will learn English. It doesn't have to be at 5 years of age. It might be by 7 or 8, because second language can build on first if the rules are in place. But here you're showing them multiple rules, multiple symbols, how many things happening. It takes time for children to be able to do that. And so some of these realities, I personally think we need to have more conversations with teachers and parents. The children are all fine. They all have their focus also on the right
Agree.
place. I think we are the ones
Absolutely.
who overwhelm and inundate them. And we really have to take stock of that today, especially in this world of competition today. I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Renuji.
Nandini is so well put. That I know I'll be persecuted for this, but the thought that came to my mind is it the children who are dyslexic, or is it the parents who are dyslexic? Should have been the next question. We need to change the adults in our society, probably. Yes. And it's so amazing to know that we are the only ones we are the only ones who believe in two language at age 5. And so building on the foundation and connecting with Jayanti ji and Nandini, she about, invisibility and visible, making the things visible and transparent is my takeaway from the entire aspect here. And coming to from here, we had this whole process of universal design of learning. Anupamji, may I ask you? I am still trying to understand better this concept of the universal design of learning, UDL, which speaks about equity in access to learning, which includes the child with SLD. How can we improve access to teaching learning material, in particular textbooks for all children in inclusive classrooms, because textbooks are still there to stay for a long time. You're on mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, just give this child a statement. Textbooks are, or most often children will say boring. They don't want to read a textbook.
True.
And just like what Nandini just said, we as parents say, oh, he's not reading the textbook. How is he going to gain knowledge? Where is he going to get all the information? How is he going to respond in the exam? The textbook is, excuse me, I say so, but the Bible, the Gita, the everything for a teacher, for a parent. And, this is April. This is the time when we go and buy new textbooks, fill up the bags, new books, new beginnings are made. A child looks at his book and says, oh my God, it's become fatter. It's thicker. Am I expected to read this? Now, this is something that we need to address. We need to remember that if we just ask our children to give their fingerprints, each child's fingerprint is different. And if I was to make a mosaic in the class, I would have such a lovely painting with the fingerprints of children, and no two fingerprints will match. Now, that's the point UDL is addressing. And this is research-based. Every child, we've been saying all morning today, there is a way the child learns. We need to respect that. Giving only print material and a fat textbook or a thin one is not going to be the way forward. For an SLD or any other child, we need to think out of the box. We have a new policy in place. We're going to have a new curriculum framework. We're going to have a new curriculum, syllabus, and textbooks. They need to be in different forms for children. A child needs to be given an option. If I don't want to read this fat book that's given to me, I can just listen to the chapter. An audio can be given to me. That's a simple option, isn't it? Why can I not have the story with sound effects? That's another option of the same chapter. Now, I want sound effects to come, and that is what makes me read better. I don't want sound effects to come. I just want a simple narration of the chapter. That's something that I have an option. I want a digital version. Mind you, I'm not saying just making textbooks in digital form. That doesn't make them accessible for SLD or any other child. We need to work on accommodations, which Nandini talked about and Jayantichi referred. We need to realize that a child would prefer if the colors in the visual are worked on. In other words, whatever I'm writing in the text, if the visual accentuates the character by making it stand out, that's a step forward in the reading process for a child. Because suppose there's a line which says, in a story, and mind you, what Nandini just said is very important to take on board. Before we give children textbooks, let them learn to enjoy reading. And if a child is going to get into the reading process enjoying it, he will naturally move on to the textbook. But if we say this is the be all and end all of your existence, you have to only read this, then the answer is going to be very difficult for us educators to explore. So, what is important is that we expose children to different forms, and that's what UDL tells us. Give them a print version, give them a digital version, give them an audio version. Let them choose. You know, we spend so much time helping children choose clothes. We never give them any choice in the classroom. And that's what we have worked on very, in a, 24/7, lived with it for years at NCRT in order to provide children and teachers to understand that these options are worth exploring and are available. And what we really did was pick up our own very well-researched reading series, and we worked on that reading series to make it accessible for all, including children with specific learning disabilities. Let me tell you what we did. Well, it's a long story, but I'm going to tell you in a few seconds only. Okay, we engaged many experts, and most of the people here in the Renu, you yourself were there. Jayantichi was there right from the beginning till the very end. You know what a taskmaster I became, almost with friends. But we had to achieve our goals within the stipulated time to work on examplers, and we had 40 storybooks. And these were storybooks with visual and one-line content, two-line content, three-line, and four-line. And these stories were set in the children's own context. So the child immediately identified with the story and said, oh, they're playing hide and seek. I also play hide and seek. Okay, let me read. So what are you doing? You are giving the child a reading material he is naturally inclined to pick up. And because it has a visual, he's more attracted to it. It's not filled with text. So if as the child reads, let me tell you a few simple things we did. We helped the child locate where does the sentence start. Not by standing on the head of the child and say, put your finger here, this is where the sentence begins. Now move your finger from left to right and you come to the end. No, we just put a green dot in the beginning of the sentence and a red dot at the end. Now, this natural inclusion of a dot helped the child realize, oh, green light means go. I can start from here. Oh, red means stop. So I stop here. And then you go to the next line. You don't miss words. You move in a natural progression from left to right. You don't omit words. You learn to read with meaning and pleasure. And you understand what you are reading. Now, if you look at the visual is in tune with the content. It stands out for you, and you don't have to stress if there are so many other things. Remember what Nandini just said. We have to remove stress from reading. A visual helps to do that. Now, working on the visual, giving a border, working on the colors of the visual, giving a small arrow at the bottom of the page to help a child naturally pick up that this is the way you go forward. You don't skip pages when you read. Now, when you have it in a digital version, you can go back to page 2. When you're reading and you're on page 6 and you forget the link, you don't have to look at others, who are looking at you, the children. You can naturally navigate back and forth. Now, this small arrow is a accommodation that reading processes help. It's helpful in the reading process. You know, and I know, that children get stuck with difficult words. They stop reading, when they come across too many difficult words, and then they just start pretending they are reading. They may pretend for you and me, but they lose the thread of reading. So what did we do? We said, let's look, and on all these things that I'm telling you are research-based. We did a thorough tryout across the country. We said, let's pick up the difficult words for children. Let's not put them away in some other place. On the page where the book is, where the difficult word appears for the child, let's put a window with the difficult word and the whole picture of it. Because very often visuals are just, drawn by artists in a way that do not give the complete picture. So a child with specific learning disabilities needs to know that a door has a knob in the center. It doesn't just have, is not slashed from the top or bottom as it appears in the visual, in the book. So the window the child opens sees the complete visual of the door, and under the visual is written the word darwaza. Now, when he reads darwaza, and he also, the same thing is given in Braille, incidentally. We didn't make it only for children with specific learning disabilities. We made it for all children in the classroom. So when the child opens this window, he or she can read and find the answer to the difficult word on his own. He doesn't have to ask the teacher, raise a hand, I don't know. And the teacher saying, I just told you, you're again asking, don't disturb me. The teacher is not wrong when she's doing that. If 10 children keep asking her again and again the meaning of a word, obviously she's not going to find her rhythm in teaching. So these sort of small introductions and variations that we brought in the text really help children navigate in the process and read without missing, without omitting, and not just read. They learned to read, getting the good habits. As many mothers said, we want our children to learn good reading habits, when we ask them. Now, this is what we say is learning the right way forward with a sense of interest and pleasure. And when we got this going, we have seen that the impact has been really positive. We have also, incidentally, Nandini said, introducing an introduction. And if it's in the mother tongue, that's really, really useful. Let me tell you, signing is also a language which all children need to know that it is a language. So what we have also done is that we've introduced a sign language introduction in that video. So what a child with SLD learns along with other children is, oh, that's also a language. I am looking at the introduction of the video in the regular form. Here is my friend who is just like me but has some differences, which everybody is noticing. And here is a sign language video. So what you're flagging for children in the formative period is that reading is a process we all enjoy collectively and we all learn differently. And we have a sign language video that's introducing and a regular language video. That's laying also the foundation for inclusion in the early years. Then we don't talk about attitudinal problems later on. So I'm trying to explain the whole process that we lived through in order to cater to the needs of reading, helping children read with a sense of, I can do it. It's fun. And there are just 16 pages that I have to read at one time. I don't have to look at that fat textbook. So the transition, Venu, then from these books to the textbooks takes place in a natural manner. That's also something that we have been striving for. And let me tell you, we've got real good results. We have used this learning in working on chapters in our own textbooks. So, it's not just a reading series. we have seen its impact in making our textbooks accessible. What we are really striving for is that we, in the coming years, make our textbooks born accessible, you know, for everybody. And I will talk about that sometime if time permits later. But I don't want to eat into the time of my co-panelists, so I'll stop here. But I can talk about the impact of this exemplar till the cows come home, because we've seen lots of positive outcomes in the process of reading for children with specific learning disabilities and other children in the classroom.
Anupam ji, I'm leaving the webinar just now and I'm going in search for a time machine because I need to sit on that time machine and go back to my primary school again. And there, this whole excitement of how the class would be in today's scenario, thanks to Anupam ji and NCRT. So it's going to be simple, concretized, demystification of things happening and engaging and exciting. So here, I would thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the excitement and all the wonderful work that you have been talking about. From here comes in the next question is Jayanti ji, when we talk about diagnosis, for children with SLD, generally it's said that we do the diagnostic test till only when the child reaches a particular developmental stage, say 8 years, and so on and so forth. But if the early intervention, but that by that time the early intervention stage would have gone, formative years would have gone. So this whole controversy, debate, how do we discuss this? What do we do about it?
Yeah, this is a kind of paradoxical situation, right? Because our RPWD Act and its rules and regulations says that a child with SLD, suspected to be having SLD, must be assessed for the first time only at the age of 8 years. The reason being, the whole thing, as our friends have been telling, that it is to do with the academic learning, and therefore the child should have been given at least 2 years of academic learning opportunity and look for consistency in his poor performance to be referring for assessment. So if you try to do it very early, you academic learning has not started. So what will you assess? So this is the reason, I think, and the wisdom of the expert committee to keep it once at 8 years, once at 14 years, and the final one at 18 years of the child's age for diagnosis. Now, the teachers can, I have seen the teachers having this tendency, अभी तो उसका diagnosis नहीं हुआ है, so उसको कुछ नहीं ना अभी, you know. So this is a dangerous situation, because all of us know that neuroplasticity is at its best in early childhood, and the maximum brain development happens in the first 2 years of the child, and later, as the child grows, there is less left to be done by the age of 18 years. Therefore, the first 6 years are critical period, and 8 years only diagnosis. Till then, SLD we have got nothing to do with. Should not be the complacency or the attitude of the professional community, particularly the teachers. So let us call children with certain behavioral manifestations as perhaps children at risk. Children at risk is a popularly used terminology. Maybe when you assess him at the age of 8, nothing is wrong, he is fine, all is good. But if something is wrong, you feel good that you have already intervened, considering him as having probably can come into the bracket of specific learning disability later. So very young children, when they start their preschool, one of the things that many studies show, that when you ask for history from the parents, these many of these children tend to have a delay in speech, not necessarily receptive language, not necessarily in understanding, but to produce oral language, the speech. So that can be an indicator of risk we can keep. And there are many children who speak late also on the one side. So usually risk factors taken into consideration are a larger net, and many may be finally negative. But no harm in intervening is the point I'm trying to highlight and make. So then children who do not come as they grow into say 3 years or so, incomplete tasks, they do not do many things completely. Here something there, get diverted. Here something here, get diverted there. Or leave anything in half and keep running around, which parents say बहुत active है बच्चा, बहुत active है, you know. So another thing you will find, not interested in picture books. There are children by the time 3 or so we try to inculcate bedtime stories and things like that, isn't it? But many of these children are not interested in any kind of book or holding pencil and pen. You know, such children, and not that they have to write ABCD. I am not saying that, please don't misread me. It is not that the children start to read and write, but the basic showing interest in paper, you know, the book, the scribbling on the wall, all that children do by 3 years. But these are children who may not be. So some of these are, I repeat, quote unquote, risk factors. So call these children as children at risk and continue to give them the stimulation, the support, you know, the amber light. It's not the red light as yet, and it's not the green light also as yet. So these are children in amber light phase. So give them the support that the teacher can provide. Maybe the damage, the manifestation of his problem could be minimized because we have started early. At the time when he reaches the 80th diagnosis, maybe he is uh, diagnosed as SLD, he is not diagnosed as SLD. It is fine if he is not SLD, but giving him the support early in his life is not a mistake, isn't it? So that he is able to, at least if there is a problem, it gets minimized because he has been attended to. And our own government, the 8 year certification also, they have made it as temporary. Again, there is one at 14 that gives the child the allowances for examination and dropping off another language. Nandini ji is right from the beginning worried about the dual language systems in the country. So somewhere they have considered that, and dropping language arrangements and all is made. And 18-year one is only the permanent certification. So the 8 year and 14-year-old can still be negating that the child is having SLD. All this because of the invisible nature of the condition. You see, it's not like an organicity visible, like a vision impaired child. Right away, you make out the child has no vision or hearing or intellectual disability. Or whereas here, the invisible nature has led to this. My before closing, my appeal to all the teachers is, don't wait for diagnosis at the age of 8 years. When you find risk factors, call it as child at risk for learning, and don't even write it in the records or anything, but because it's a school system, maybe somewhere in the register you have it as a query made, and continue to give the support to the child. Call him by his name, not by the diagnostic label that is yet to come. Or even if the diagnostic label comes, the child has a नामकरण अच्छी टाइम लेके दिया गया है बच्चा को, उसी नाम से बुलाना, attachment कुछ नहीं करना. Your job is to teach. We have a lot of material available now. Look at Anupamji spoke about the whole UDL linked material without telling its name. Barkha series is the name of it. Go on the net and then you click on it. It is free, available for you. Fantastic. Graded reading. You know, graded first part 10 books of single line reading, second set of 10 books of 2 line reading, 3 line reading, and all are color coded, easy to pick up. Fantastic set of material. We can start this with preschool children even when there is no diagnosis made. Don't wait for diagnosis. We teachers are interested in seeing the neurodiversity that Nandini ji spoke about, and diverse classroom that Anupam ji spoke about. Each child is different. Take him as he comes, give him the best. Don't wait for diagnosis to teach. It is not our job. We have a beautiful name given to the child. Let us use that name to interact with the child, do our best to the child. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayanti ji. I mean, so you say we should not try to start labeling the child from the beginning. Let us go on with our job as teachers and educators and look at the risk factors. And this was a very good enlightening information that the final certificate is not given at 8. It waits till the child is mature, so that invisibility of making a mistake and identifying a person as dyslexic just because the education system is at flaw somewhere. There is a question which is coming in the chat box and which says that, is dyslexia SLD a disease? Any of
No,
the panelists would like
it's
to,
not a
because I'm so,
disease. It's not
huh.
a disease at all. It's the way the brain is structured and processes information. Okay? We all do things differently. If tomorrow somebody decided that the system of evaluation is going to be who stands first in a 100-meter race, then some of us might fail and then we'll become despotic. That's because we've set up a system of evaluation where we think only academia matters. So it's by no means a disease. This is just differences in the way the brain is wired. And as a society, we are obsessed with literacy and numeracy. We have to begin to look as children as human beings. We have to enable them to become and recognize their best potentials and become the best version of themselves. Being able to read books after books is not going to make you a good human being.
Absolutely.
Okay? It's an ability that is helpful to function, to enhance language, but it's by no means the end of the world. I think we must begin to emphasize this as a society. And I just want to use this opportunity to just bring to fore a point that has recently come about. Recently, MGIP, which is UNESCO's first Category 1 institute, conducted the IC assessment, which is the first international science and evidence based education assessment. There were 300 scientists across the world who participated, and we just released it on 22nd March in Paris. And one of the biggest take homes from that message are that one is that learning is a cognitive emotional process. Uh, Personalized education is a human right. Okay? And therefore, one of the biggest policy recommendations from that is coming back to a point that Jayantiji was sort of leaning towards, but has not yet happened. We are trying to push for that in policy is, can we begin to bring in universal screening when children come to school? Universal screening is not to be able to identify specific learning disabilities, but to be able to put a system in place whereby we recognize the needs of every learner. Okay? I might need help in social connections. My reading might be fine. Somebody else might need help with sound processing. Somebody else might need help with emotion management. Somebody else might need help with attention. But a child, if a teacher is aware of the different needs of the child, the classroom can begin to make sure that all these needs are provided. And universal screening is probably our best bet at achieving education for all. Anupamji is part of the EFA game, and which is supposed to get all kids uh, into education by 2030. Just bringing kids into school is not going to solve that purpose. We have to
No.
give them what they need, and therefore universal screening probably needs to become a reality. It's not going to be easy, but I think we owe it to our children now that we know how learning happens in the brain. So that risk which Jayantiji was talking about will actually be, every child will need something. And we need to make sure our schools and systems are ready to provide all of those, not just literacy and numeracy. There is much more to life than literacy and numeracy, I'm afraid. I'm sorry for jumping in there, but I couldn't resist it.
No, and it was such an important question which needed to be uh, uh, highlighted and explained, and so you put it in so well, Nandini. And so we are saying that dyslexia or specific learning disability is not a disease; it's a condition which is there to stay. But we need classes, which are classrooms and school systems and education systems, which are able to cater for every child's engagement and learning. And coming to here, probably Nandini, you've already sort of given me the answer, but anyway, let me re-put that question. So the brain of every child is different. The brain of every child with dyslexia or specific learning disability. Will that be similar? Will I, supposing I have a child with dyslexia in my class today, will the same things apply for the child which I'll get next year?
Not at all. Not at all.
So
The
everyone's
moment we
shaking their
recognize
head.
neurodiversity, that goes out of the window. Every child is going to have different needs. Every child with dyslexia will have different needs, and we have to attend to them at that level. I think we really have to begin to think about the fact that however challenging personalized learning is going to be, we have to find ways so that our learning and pedagogy is such that, and Anupam ji already referred to it in the context of UDL, the moment you bring in universal design for learning, you have something that meets the needs of every child. Okay? It cannot be only one approach, but it has to be a multimodal approach. If we do that, we will address the needs of most children. And I think that's about the best that we can do. And I think if
Absolutely.
we start looking at children as beings, we are just there to nurture and provide them the best way to realize their potential. How can marks be the basis for deciding if a child is
No.
successful or not? That's the worst thing we can do for our society.
So a lot of work that we as teachers need to be thinking about for ourselves.
And
Would you like
parents
to
too.
add? And parents too, and society at large. Exactly. So it is a tough proposition for we, the so-called the knowledgeable adults and professionals who are trying to take forward the citizens of tomorrow. May I, would Jayanti ma'am, would you want to add something or may I continue? Or would you,
Um, you mean to say the
uh,
question that you posed now? You, I think, have
yes, yes.
closed
Huh.
it with the right
Right,
comment.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming to Anupam ji, we at Anupam, we are talking about the pandemic has actually been a challenging situation for everyone, but it also brought in a lot of new normals and lot of innovations that we can take forward. And NCRT has been working on those initiatives to explore the use of online learning, accessibility of material for children with SLD in particular, and for children with diversities or disabilities in general. Uh, Need a little insight on that.
Sure. Pandemic was difficult time for all of
Yeah.
us, and we braved it. I must say that as
Yeah.
teachers and teacher educators, we were left grappling with what to do. And that was what many in the country asked NCRT to help. Um, I would just give you a brief of what we did. Many things. Obviously, that was the need of the hour. So we go into many things. I'll just focus on one. But before I do that, I would like to also say that what Nandini and Jayanti just was saying, let's very quickly dwell on one issue, and that is demystifying this whole concept of pedagogy, the best way to work with children. Let's just also acknowledge the natural instincts of a teacher. That's something we realized during the pandemic as well. The teachers know it. They need just a pat on the back and a nod from the so-called experts that what we are doing is okay. That is something that the pandemic also taught us. Small efforts in the right direction with good meaning are important and need to be nurtured. Now, in this process, we also were asked to look at e-content and to look at how material is put on our websites and what is available for children and how accessible it is. This was something that we wanted teachers to use material and help children learn online. And what we realized was, to aghast we were left sometimes, that the quality of material was really something that we needed to look into, and that's what gave rise to this work that is now available and is a step forward. I don't say it's the end all. There's always more we can add to technology. We worked, and the Ministry of Education had set up a committee and a subcommittee, and we got together like-minded people, and we worked on how we can provide quality online material for teachers in their classrooms. Let me just put it very simply. It's guidelines for developing e-content for children with special needs. And that, when we worked on this, we were asked to cover all 21 disabilities. And children with specific learning disabilities have been a key focus in these guidelines. In fact, it has 11 sections, and section 5 of these guidelines focuses on just children with specific learning disabilities. I made the error of not giving the title. So, Jayantiji, this time I've given the title right away. It's the guidelines for developing e-content for children with special needs. And it is a joint effort by many experts who put their heads together during the pandemic and worked out very simply what are the key characteristics of children first, because we wanted to tell teachers who are they, because that was something that the basic we had to start with. And then how do we produce material for them that's really meaningful and is accessible? That was the key focus. And when we were doing this, we were how we can comply to existing standards that exist internationally and nationally, and how we can work on accessible digital textbooks. That's also something that we have talked about in these guidelines, because that's a reality that we have also to face. UNICEF has done good work in this area. We have learned a lot from what we have done at NCRT, and we are now wanting that these guidelines should take us towards, as I mentioned earlier, born accessible textbooks for children in the coming years. Now, we picked up what we learned from the Barkha series. We picked up what we learned from the accessible textbooks that we developed, accessible textbooks for all, and from research and work done globally. And, very simple, if I was to tell you what we very simply discovered was that technology alone is not enough. Technology, content, and pedagogy have to go together. Then only will it really work, And in itself, a teacher can never be replaced. You cannot think that you've given a child a best online material and a child with specific learning disabilities can learn. And, I can now go and do my other chores, or, I'm not needed. No, a human interface is essential. Even when we have the best of materials, there is no replacement for a teacher. We realize that we need to give an introduction, and that, as Nandini said, best to give it in the mother tongue or in a language that the child understands. We need to give simple instructions on how to use this material. We need to have descriptive hyperlinks to access supplementary and additional material, because otherwise the child again gets, feels suffocated in what's being given. You need simple, easy to read language. You need to provide what we learned from Barkha, a glossary of difficult words. Now, I can go on. These were learnings that we picked up and we have put together in the form of guidelines for teachers and parents and experts to use. We also realized that a textbook writer and a technology person need to marry and work together. You cannot work in silos, and say, okay, I produce this textbook, now I will make it accessible. That's not something how it will, that's not the way it will work. And we were very clear that the child must be able to perceive the content. There is a lot of emphasis given in the guidelines that the material should be perceivable. The child should be able to understand it, should be able to use it in different, on a laptop, or it could be a smartphone or on a desktop. So the material should be robust, and the aim should be to give equivalent ease of access to every child. That's something that the guidelines very clearly talks about, Renu. All this is
Sure.
available on the NCRT website and the Ministry of Education website. Uh, the specific learning disability section was headed by none other than Jayantiji herself here, so she can add more to it. But I was, orchestrating between all of them and
Yeah.
coordinating. But I must say that it's a pioneer piece of work that we had to give within the stipulated time. There's lots we can add to it, but it's a good beginning to make to make people think of the importance of e-content for all children. Let's remember that the
The,
worst who suffered during the pandemic were our children. They were isolated. They were not. They often unlearned also what they had learned. So this was really required, and the ministry's effort in this direction is really laudable. Over to Jayanti ji if she wants to add to the section
yes, ma'am.
5,
Yes,
which
Jayanti
works on
ji.
specific learners.
Quickly, please, we are talking about regional languages and what Anupa has spoken. We are running short of time,
Yeah,
so
I
we need
know.
your comments quickly. Yes, ma'am.
No, I only want to thank Anupam ji for giving me, and also Renu ji was part of it, the exercise
Yes.
that she's talking about, for putting together this material for teachers. And one nice thing that happened, all that you have explained is, I don't have to add anything, but to say that Anupam ji did not just stop with development of material, but she made sure that the whole country had it disseminated very systematically through workshop in each zone through the regional institutes of education, so that in the system the SERT, DIET mechanisms carry it to the teacher, to every government school teacher, up to the government school teacher it should go. Country like India with this kind of very diversities and varied lifestyles and everything, every primary school to reach is not easy in the government system. But the best thing, every often I think about it and wonder how Anupam ji managed this. Get this content uh, in the workshop form through the RAEs to every teacher educator in the government mechanism like the DIET, SERT staff members, who in turn probably now are reaching it to their teachers also. And as she said, because there are websites and hyperlinks, whether they teach or not, our teachers will be able to access them. And I think this is one major step towards and very significant step toward creating awareness to the teachers about who are these children with invisible disability that they have and what you can do, not just telling them who they are, but telling them what you can do as a teacher with all the know-how. I think that's a great job you have done, अनुपम जी, इन रीचिंग द होल कंट्री. तो मटेरियल तो बन जाता है, आपके पीछे इतने बुक्स हैं, उसमें बहुत सारे मटेरियल है, लेके पढ़ना है ना, हाँ, वो भी तो है. So that bit you have done it, not just developing material, but you have reached it to the whole country. I think
It was a joint effort, Jayanti ji. Renu was there,
fantastic.
you were there, and so many others. And in the process, we also realized that we were all passionate about it. And I think that was a very, very important learning as well.
Sitting in the driving seat, you led us. Let me put it in a very short sentence. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Thank you so much, everyone. See, I said in the beginning, we had these experts pan India and see how the entire content of this invisible disability they have been able to disseminate across the country. Now, when I go to the deepest of the village, they would at least know what is SLD, what is dyslexia.
Hopefully.
So, what a beginning! What a beginning! Thank you so much. There are so many questions which are in the chat box because of possibility of time. The experts, we will pass on those questions to the experts, and they will uh, and take their inputs from there and put them on the IBAFA website later on. And so, moving forward, oh, this was mind wobbling. And Erica Cook has very clearly answered something, and I just want to repeat it. I don't suffer from dyslexia. I live with and work with it. I suffer from the ignorance of people who think they know what I can and cannot do. And thank you. all the experts with your expertise. It was amazing, and the way you were able to put it down and make us understand. And so I understand also that dyslexia is just an alternative way of thinking. SLD is just an alternative way of thinking. Thank you, Jayanti ji, Nandini, and Anupam for making it so exciting and so simple. May I now request Professor Adarsh Sharma to give us the way forward, as we already know that Professor Adarsh Sharma is a freelance consultant in the field of early childhood education and human development, and has worked with national and international organizations and agencies on short and long term assignments. With a master's in HDFS from MS University Baroda, a doctoral from University of Delhi, postdoctoral research as a Fulbright scholar, and her professional career spans 4 decades, and it still continues. The amount of work that she's able to put in a day is amazing. She had retired as a director of the National Institute of Public Cooperation and Child Development. She supported the establishment of the Center for Early Childhood Education and Development at Ambedkar University. And she also is being the vice president of IBAFA and is a very active member of IBAFA. Over to Dr. Adarsh Sharma.
Thank you, Renu, for all your kind words. Greetings to everyone from Dehradun, and I think I need to congratulate IWAFA for doing this total series of webinars and giving me a chance to be in the first one to give suggestions for way forward. I must admit that I am not an expert in dyslexia at all, because I am a human development professional who has worked in early childhood education for a long time. So I have dealt with the issues related to learning language and can you am I
Yes,
offline?
yes, you no, you are not
Hello?
visible, but you are audible. Please
No,
continue, Dr.
am
Sharma.
I offline? Is it I'm
No,
offline?
no, you are online and your
Okay.
voice is audible. Please continue.
You know how network here in Dehradun is. It can give you all kinds of problems. Anyway, since I said I'm not an expert, but I'm very happy that we had panelists who are very ably enlightened us on various aspects of the problem, and I want to flag a few which is very important. I think thank you, Anupama, for directly giving the diversity a big name of accommodation and adjustment, and giving us so much of information on the material which you have developed. We are very grateful to you. Nandini, I think a misunderstood term you have defined so well and elaborated the process of learning language and how pedagogy can be affected by it, and particularly bringing the issue of the multi language environment which we have in India while language is learned was very critical, and I think I would like to flag it. When it comes to Jayanti ji, her experience is so vast, but I would like to really put on record and point out to everyone that the critical years importance was very nicely highlighted, how early intervention has to be done, and in particular the implications it has on emotional adjustment and social stigma and so on was very well elaborated. I think the whole concept is very misunderstood. It is conveniently labeled as learning disabilities, but years of research has very clearly shown that a child who has this difficulty, it does not lack intelligence or motivation, but it is differently based on the neurological basis, which Nandini ji has very clearly pointed out. Renu, I need to thank you a lot for very aptly entitling the webinar as Gift of Dyslexia, an Effective Brain with a Difference. I think I like to elaborate and give few thoughts on this, because our panelists have touched about it, that it could be extraordinary ability, but I think I would like to dwell on it a bit. What a great change your title has made in the perspective of perceiving an individual with the problem. In 1983, when this disability was really identified, do you know what it was called? It was called congenital blindness for words. What a sad name. Congenital blindness for words. Now, I think research over the years have very nicely added lot of insights to our understanding, and how it is linked with brain structures and its processes. It is now confirmed that a common variation in brains of individual with or without dyslexia exists. Modern technology of imagery and MRI has shown have very clearly shown that there is an increased activity in the area of brain associated with reading in individuals with dyslexia, and whereas the other individuals may not receive the same information as their peers, but process the written language very differently. In dyslexia brain, there is a more activity in the frontal lobe, as very nicely Nandini pointed out, and less activity in the parietal and the occipital areas of the brain. Interestingly, this mental function that causes this problem is a gift in the truest sense of the word, a natural ability and a talent. It is something very special that enhances several other cognitive competencies. David and Braun have said that there are few abilities which are common to all people who have this kind of brain functioning. Their ability is to alter and create perceptions, high awareness of environmental surroundings, more they are more curious than average people. They are highly intuitive and have are insightful. They think their thinking is mainly in pictures and not in words. Multidimensional perception they use in using all their senses. Thoughts and expressions Thoughts are expressed as realities. Many of us think, but we don't know how to turn them into reality. Vivid imagination, amazing indeed. I'm so impressed to see that if all these abilities were not suppressed and these faculties were made to work, we would have transformed these blessed abilities into a brain which would be more intelligent than the normal people and would do extraordinary creative things. It is clear that it allows highly visual people to think laterally around a problem and think of multi-dimensionality instead of one perspective. It is virtually making them outside of the box thinker. I would give you a few examples of the people I came across during my reference. Richard Barson, who is a British millionaire, Muhammad Ali boxer, who's a champion, who's a champion, Salma Hayek, who is a Mexican actress, and Raymond John, who's an investor and a businessman in US, all have this disability, but are doing so well in life. I'm fascinated with this gift. I forgot to propose the strategies while describing all these good things about the problem. Let me just try to summarize a few of the things which I can suggest after what all I have heard from the presenters, and let's see if the way forward any of these things could be translated into action. First, we need to definitely promote understanding and awareness as a concept needs to be given our first priority. Its implication for learning and its management to optimally utilize this gift needs to be totally attended by all stakeholders. Continuous research on brain every day brings out new theoretical concepts and sound strategies of managing the disability can be managed and guidance can be done to really help the community in realizing their potential. Developing a action oriented strategy based on this knowledge would definitely require our earlier concepts and contradictions which we had in our mind while we were planning teaching and learning pedagogy. Early intervention, of course, as even Jayanti ji pointed out, is very important. So we need to really create certain tests which are sensitive, culturally appropriate, and for that, probably we would require a multidisciplinary approach, and a rehabilitation program needs to be evolved which would probably include parents, teachers, psychologists, pediatricians, speech and language experts, occupational therapists, and so on. But the ultimate aim is that we really have tests which will enable us to identify and find out the risk children at the right time so that that screening can help in really helping them at the right state. I'm really amazed that we haven't done screening mandatory within the policy also, maybe due to the lack of all these tests and so on. But I think it is very important that this kind of a review is done not at the age of 8 but from the preschool age to all the grades so that it could really be handed and instructions and other interaction with these children could be done in a manner which would help them to overcome this particular problem. I think parents are a great participant in the whole process. The home based interventions have to be taught even before the children come to school to promote such an enriched, what they call as the literacy learning environment, and inputs can be given accordingly so that our children, instead of getting hesitant and facing the stigma which was described so well by Jayanti ji, could be overcome, and this anxiety will not interfere with their process of learning. I think there is even a change needed in the curriculum, and it has to be specially customized to the students depending upon their extent of their problem, age at which it is detected. And I think this would probably lead to creating even a material which Anupa has been doing very effectively, but that material also has to be based on what they call as empirically found information so that reading could be promoted from phonemic awareness and in the context of our cultural multi-language thing which we have already highlighted. I think teaching manuals have been developed if they would reach the teachers and if they are provided with the proper training of using them, it would be great, and we would be able to help this particular issue and a problem which really is confronted by almost, they say, 4 to 17% of children. I could be wrong on my figures, and I think it is very important that we try to see that an inclusive classroom environment needs to be created as the new education policy has recommended. All children need to be given equal opportunities, and I think it is, we owe to them what we know. uh, there are several things which the literature talks about, and uh, one has to really work on it. And the time is very little for me to elaborate on these things, but there is a collateral training, reading and spellings, increase spacing between the printed words, and so on. So there are lovely lots of suggestions which are available to us, and therefore new pedagogical approaches we need to really create, and we should experiment them, validate them with our experience, and choose what is best for us. There is a need of creating an ethos of culturally appropriate literacy and family in environment of language learning in family, school, and in general thing. And we should ensure participation of all stakeholders, which doesn't include family, community, school, but even policymakers and politicians. Uh, lot of work has been done by NCRT, I believe, in resource material development. Using digital and IT facilities would probably make us reach a large number of people, which would be great. And I think we need to be very careful when we are using the measures, because once we use the measures, we label a person with a particular ability, and if that measure hasn't, or the tool hasn't been used properly, we may be doing more of this, I mean, harm than the advantage of it. And I think it is very important that rights of these children should really be protected. And I want to end with a very positive note, that we must remember how much a child be struggling with learning to read, but we must know that human brain is very malleable, and a right intervention can help any child at any time, and it can make a child read with fluency, master language, and be effective. I would say the takeaways from the whole presentation and webinar is teacher training, tutoring, tools, and measurement, and all to be used for empowering family, teachers, other stakeholders, and curriculum. And I'm sure we will be able to give the child what he deserves, because we owe it to them. It is only our concerted efforts which would lead there. And I'm so glad that IBAFA is doing a series of it and reaching many people who are concerned with it, to take some kind of message and deal with the problem effectively. Thank you so much for your indulgence, and thank you, Renu, for giving this chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Adesh Sharma. It's always a pleasure listening to you. Now, as we come to the end of the webinar, may I request Sarla Manchanda to give the vote of thanks on behalf of IBAFA. Sarla Manchanda has rendered selfless service to this organization for over 2 decades. She has served IBAFA in different capacities, such as executive member, joint secretary, secretary, and vice president. Currently, she's a senior executive member. She's a former associate professor of household and textile chemistry, Lady Urban College, University of Delhi. Uh, the activities which were organized by Sarla Manchanda for IVFA, when through the span of our presence here, includes our solar fairs in Haryana village, seminars on green and solar energy in Delhi. She has been taking care of the Nina Sibel Awards for over 18 years and conducted workshops on intergeneration bonding, cybersecurity awareness workshops, workshops on drug addiction prevention, and this is just a peep into her biodata. Over to Sarla Manchanda. Vote of thanks.
Thank you, Renu, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of the webinar and offer the vote of thanks on behalf of IBAFA. So, on behalf of IBAFA, I thank all the panelists and the audience for attending this webinar. I thank IBAFA President Ms. Asha Chandra to apprise you all about this 92-year-old organization, IBAFA. I thank IBAFA team, Dr. Renu Malviya in particular, for visualizing and planning to hold. Sorry, I thought there is some disturbance. Visualizing and planning to hold 5 webinars on specific learning disability, that is SLD. The subject is such that it is not understood well, or rather, I should say, misunderstood by most of the people. We think about it as a disability or retardation, but after attending today's workshop, webinar, we all know that it is not so. It is just that the brain works differently. Even the topic chosen for today's webinar, of dyslexia, an effective brain with a difference, is so self-explanatory. It's a wonderful topic. I thank our panelists, Dr. Jayanti Narayan, Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh, and Professor Anupama Ahuja for explaining so well in so many simple words that what SLD is and how to recognize this, how to assess, and the ways to handle such persons in a manner that their disability or the drawback becomes a boon for them and not remain a drawback. Thanks to the expert panelists for sharing their remarkable knowledge and vast national and international experience and to create an awareness in the society. I also thank Dr. Adarsh Sharma for a practical and feasible way forward. In the end, I thank IBAFA's technical and administrative teams and also the staff and the students of Education Department of Lady Irwin College for the success of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarla Manchanda. And as we end, here is the announcement for the next webinar. So the next is 15th April 2020 at 11:30. Please, we'll be meeting on Facebook and YouTube again for webinar 2 of the series, Dyscalculia and Dyslexia. Why can't they understand me? So thank you one and thank you all. We meet you on 15th April again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I hope the screenshots are being taken.